Sourcing executives are increasingly challenged with being faster, more agile, more sustainable, more transparent, and also finding better products that their brand's customers will want to buy. They also face a massive range of new technologies that, if implemented strategically, could be game-changing. That is, if they could get the entire team on board. If we connect all of the dots, what might the future of sourcing look like? I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. To get that future view, I reached out to Christophe Roussel, Executive Vice President of Sourcing and Production for Gap Inc. Christophe has the vision to be able to see beyond the immediate challenges and envision a new model for sourcing that ties in advanced data analysis and cutting-edge technology to deliver the right products at the right time, and in doing so reduce waste and thus achieve greater sustainability and profitability. In this episode, Christophe explains where he sees new opportunities for supply chain advancement, his ideal for vendor relationships, how vendors could better serve customers, and what his greatest supply chain concerns are. Before we get started, if you're looking for a future vision of the key trends and technical innovations in knitwear, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are filled with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Now join Christophe and me at the table as we dive into the future of apparel sourcing. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Christophe. It seems like Gap Inc. is doing so many exciting new things right now. I watched your investor relations presentation last November, and it was really bursting with new energy. And I think one of the biggest challenges that most brands face is with their supply chains. Even before the pandemic hit, everyone was looking to be faster, leaner, and more strategic. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you're doing with Gap. I think that, perhaps we can start by addressing the pandemic. We don't want to really dwell on it, but it's certainly something that everybody's facing. And the pandemic has heightened everyone's awareness of how fragile our supply chains can be. Are there specific changes you've made or are making to your supply chain to become more resilient?
Well, first, thank you for having me on your program and for your interest, in what we're doing at Gap Inc. Well, listen, related to the pandemic, as you can imagine, a company the size of Gap Inc., which is $16 billion in sales, had already in place, pre-COVID, a suite of contingency plans and risk assessment mechanisms. And this is probably part of the reason why we've been able to rebound very quickly from COVID disruptions as customers restarted shopping with us, and why we're cruising reasonably well, through the rest of the year. However, we're far from being perfect. And I would say for many other companies in supply chain, COVID has pointed out probably very clearly some risk nodes that we need to further look and mitigate, the best and the fastest we can. But outside of the risk and the resilience itself, I think the pandemic has probably taught us, 3-4 things. I think the first one is it has made us recognize and appreciate the value and the need of working collaboratively with our brand partners, within the company. And this seems natural, but I know many companies where colleagues working in their headquarters and in sourcing offices have been in regular conflict and regular tension. And so we need to be, cognizant of the value of having developed, a certain rigor and a certain discipline between the different teams, depending on where we are and the function you play. And that has helped us a lot during the pandemic. Another point is, again, recognizing and appreciating the value of the long-term relationship we've developed with our suppliers. We've been working with many of our top suppliers for decades, and they've developed a very strong emotional connection with our brands, not only with us working with the company and for the company, but with the brand themselves. Many of our suppliers, they've grown with us as our brands were taking market shares and expanding, and they are very proud producers and supporters of our business. So we've seen the value of the time we've taken, nurturing this relationship. But another point, and the third point I'll mention about this pandemic, is the value of working in true partnerships with our vendors and with our mills. And it's very, very different from long-term relationship working in true partnership. And I can elaborate a bit more later on if you're interested, because this is a topic I'm very passionate about. True partnership means having strong interdependencies between our companies, between the brands and the vendors, making sure that we all understand that we cannot win alone or at the expense of the other. And also the importance of sharing strategic business priorities, build capabilities with the vendors. All this has also paid back during the pandemic, as we've been able to develop, produce, and ship products, as you know, with no face-to-face interaction with them. And I would say the last point of this pandemic is it has also made us recognize that we need to continue to challenge ourselves to work and to think differently. We've made great strides in new ways of working, be virtual product development, responsiveness, so being faster, being more flexible. And also for us, we've been able at Gap Inc. to pivot to new products like mask, which has been a big share of our sale this year, and also personal protective equipment. So we need to accelerate. We need to accelerate this reconfiguration of the supply chain. But that's the 3 or 4 learnings that we got from the pandemic.
You mentioned long-term and particularly transparent partnerships with your vendors, and you said that was something you were very passionate about. Perhaps you might say it's one of your superpowers. Could you take us a little deeper into that?
As I was mentioning before, Gap Inc. we have many long-term relationships with the vendors, and we've been working, for decades with our key vendors. And to the point that some remember very well our founder and his wife, Don and Doris Fisher, when they were traveling across the world and visiting factories in search of new products and new ideas. And having some such relationship is great. And somehow it's really a privilege, and it has helped us tremendously. But nevertheless, in the last few years, we've been evolving towards more strategic partnerships, keeping the relationship, but becoming much more strategic in our approach of the market. And, if you look at the common definition of a strategic partnership, it's an agreement, right, between 2 or more organizations to share resources and have the objective of mutual growth or mutual success. And it's an opportunity to drive synergies that I would say otherwise will be or are perceived as possible within the confines of these respective businesses. But essentially, and I would say more importantly, a strategic partnership, it's a mindset shift. It's a shift from what's in it for me to what's in it for we. And this is how I simply define strategic partnership.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, and I think that you're right. There really does need to be that shift from competing against one another, so to speak, to working collaboratively for the good of both parties.
Yeah, because, we mentioned COVID, right? But we've been through several crises happening at the same time in the last 18 months. Yeah, okay, COVID. Let's put COVID on the side for a second. We also had political risk, and everybody talks about the China-US rivalry, the tariffs, the tension in the South China Sea, the Xinjiang issue, and also, challenges around climate and environment. And at the same time, the pace of business has continued to accelerate. Labor costs are increasing. Every 5-6 years, they're probably doubling. We see tension on raw material, on energy, on resources. Vendors are also becoming more, I would say, more picky with whom they want to work with. And there are fewer and fewer large vendors becoming extremely powerful. And also the frequency and the severity of major disrupting events, are increasing. So it's not just only COVID, Jen. It's we need to be ready to face into more and more of this type of unplanned disruptions. And the only way to manage through this disruption and start to plan for the future is really to change the way we work with our vendor, is try to change the paradigm and then work more strategically and have more interdependencies rather than having this tactical relationship that has been here for as long as sourcing has been around. So this is very, very critical because it's not only, as I say, it's not only It's not only COVID. There's a need for this paradigm shift in the way we work.
So essentially, what you're saying is that rather than the old relationship where the brand would simply give orders to the factory and the factory would simply make those orders, now you want them to be more participatory, taking more accountability, giving more feedback on their side.
Yeah, I think the traditional one-way value creation in our world, which is design, you plan, you source, you make, you fulfill, and you service, it's no more agile nor innovative enough, and it's not adequate anymore to respond to the market demands. And with this volatility we just talked about, and the rapid rate of change, in both customer demands and the economic landscape, then it's essential to be able to adapt quickly and be flexible, I think, not only to remain competitive, but just to remain alive. And so I think sourcing and supply chain executives and practitioners, they need to move beyond these functional silos and think instead about how to architect the supply chain of the future through, I would say, a network of partnerships and a network of platforms, customer-centric model, more agile, more flexible, and also asset light. So you can very, very, very quickly pivot depending on what headwinds you have to face into.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's sort of the direction that people need to take, like you said, because you never know when the next crisis is going to come up or where or what's going to be needed in order to survive. A lot of people are talking about digitization. Some people are taking action on that. How do you see that? How's that playing into what Gap is doing?
Yeah, well, digitalization, it's an important part, but it has to be seen end to end, right? It's not just looking at the product creation and working that in silo. Yeah, digital product creation was already in flight. I think it has accelerated due to the fact we've not been able to meet face to face with our brand colleagues and meet face to face with the vendors to develop products. I think it's not been a revolution. It was already there. I think COVID has accelerated the adoption of these digital product creation tools, and we've seen a lot of benefits into it. But again, if you were not prepared for that, if as a company you are not already, play with the tools, adopted some of them, it would have been impossible, to suddenly adopt this tool at scale. So again, the benefit of being very innovative, to be first to look at new technologies, has also played for our advantage and some other companies, because we were already scanning the future. It's just COVID and the situation related to COVID has accelerated the adoption of these tools.
Right.
And I think this is now something which is becoming and going to become mainstream.
So do you think that once we get past the pandemic and we are able to travel again, do you see that things will go back to the way they were with very heavy travel? Or do you think because we will have had about 2 years worth of getting used to working on Zoom or Teams or whatever, that more of the business will be done that way?
I think there's a common sense saying it takes 21 days, right, to develop new habits. I think after 21 months of not being able to travel, we're going to develop more than strong new habits. I doubt we're going to go back to where we were before the pandemic. Jane, I think also a lot of companies have and also a lot of executives have realized the benefit of doing things differently, in terms of speed. I think, when we can travel, people will travel again, but it's going to be totally different. It's going to be a travel for a purpose. It's going to be not like the big migration we were having before, right? So I think things are here to stick. I don't think we are going to ever go back to where we were before and how we were working before.
So in other words, you'd probably have a hybrid model between some travel, but also some of that would be able to use some of the newer tools.
Yes, exactly. I think you'll travel for a purpose. You'll probably travel more to a factory or to a factory with great capability in terms of design or product development. This is where you probably send your designers rather than send your designers to Hong Kong or to an office. You'll send them, to work closer with your vendors. At the same time, on your big basics or things that don't need evolution, you'll work them through more digital tools. And you're right, you'll have an hybrid of different ways of creating products. You'll probably invite your your key vendors to co-create more with you and accept the ideas and bringing them to have a seat around the table, like the podcast we are having today, because that's exactly what it is about. We need to have a different view on how we're going to interact with our key vendors and talking about this strategic partnership, this allowing them to have a seat at the table to benefit from the capability they are building and not just seeing them, as you were mentioning before, as order takers, because this is not what our strategic vendor should be. Our strategic vendor should be collaborating together with us to supply the best products and great products to our customers, looking at innovation in fabric, in construction, in machineries as well, to help us to win with the customers. And this is what the future is about. So technology is important, but as I said before, it requires a mindset shift to bring them and give them this seat around the table that they deserve, because their contribution will enable us to win faster.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think that a lot of vendors would welcome that. I think that you're right. There needs to be that more collaborative approach in order for everybody to succeed in an incredibly complex supply chain that's so global and yet is in some ways, quite fragile. Right now, most brands are looking to diversify their sourcing for the reasons we discussed in terms of hedging risk and so on and so forth. Right now, which countries look most promising from your point of view for production in the next 3 to 5 years? And what about them look interesting?
Well, I think our global sourcing footprint at Gap Inc. is extremely diverse. I think we source across more than 20 to 25 countries of origin. And each of our strategic vendors, and again, that's a big scale, right? But each of our strategic vendor, which is more, a smaller pool of vendor. So these strategic vendors and mill partner, they all fulfill key capabilities that help us to get what our customers need, right? Whether it's in store or online. But the future of supply chain, I think, as I said before, is through a network of partnership. But there is something which we all need to be aware of. The garment making is moving and is getting more and more sophisticated and more capital intensive versus labor intensive. New technology are going to rapidly invade our industry, which is probably one of the last industry to have yet to go through a technology revolution. So, the sourcing, what I call the sourcing circus or the sourcing carnival, where everybody is looking for the next country, offering the cheaper labor cost. I think I truly believe that that's gone. What we need is instead, it's stability and real long-term investment to build supply chain that will fully support our strategies. So companies will not only compete head-to-head with products and their retail structure, but we also compete with their supply chains and supply chains against supply chains. So I'm not really looking for the next, country or the next place to be. I'm more looking at how can I build stability through my business, through this network of partnership and investment in new technology. Because again, I think you'll get to the cost you need and you'll get to the quality you need and you'll get to the innovation you need and you'll get to the speed or the flexibility you need through technology, not through looking at what is the next country on the map and trying to rush to this country to harvest benefit of whatever cheap labor costs you may have in this country. I think the rules of the games are changing and pivoting, and we need to take that into account, in particular big companies like us that needs, this stability. And again, this stability and this investment in new technology, which requires capital and heavy capital investment, this is going to be only achievable through this network of partnership with key vendors. That's why, I'm sorry, I'm not answering the question about the next countries, because this is not what we're looking at. This is not where we spend our energy today. We're more spending our energy looking at what needs to be built in order to support the business on the long run through investment and technology. But in terms of geographies, I think you're going to have a rebalance of, what I call far from home to close to home, and close to home for the United States, which are core markets. Yeah, you have, production in Central America, which is something that we had started already, that probably going to intensify. But you always look at supply chain through the weakest link of a supply chain. And the weakest link of a supply chain, or what is needed, is fabric, right? So if you want to go fast, if you want to be flexible, we need to also to build the supply chain we need for the future. Yeah, Central America, South America, close to home is great for American businesses. But I think at the moment, there is not enough fabric that we need to offer customers what we are offering them today and tomorrow. So we need to look at how we reconfigure this supply chain for the long run. So it's not going to be just super quick shift and migration. Is going to take time to build the supply chain we need for the future.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And I think that getting back to your prior point, and which is quite visionary, is really looking at it from the point of view of the impact of technology, as opposed to, like you said, chasing around the globe looking for the cheapest possible labor or for some short-term opportunistic play. What technology are you watching that you feel has the most promise right now?
Well, we talk about digital in terms of on the creation side, but everything which is also associated to sustainability. Our industry is unfortunately still not made enough progress in terms of having real sustainable direction for the future. And it's not just companies, it's the industry itself need to realize things needs to change. We're talking about partnership between retailers and their vendors. I think there's also a call for this partnership between players in the industry to tackle these real challenges are the one around sustainability. So, everything where we use less water, less chemicals, less energy. This is manufacturing technology. We are also looking a lot, into it, because this is part of the future capabilities we need, which are less related to manufacturing, the design capability and the co-creation capabilities I was mentioning before with our key vendors. And also, I think there should be and there will be an evolution of the sourcing function themselves. I think today the sourcing functions are too much holding hands of the vendors. And now time has come for the key strategic vendors to be really fully integrated, but to totally own the performance they are delivering for you. So doing the right thing in the factories, taking care of their workers, training them, protecting them is super important. Of course, producing quality and producing transparently, the production, shipping on time, owning their bill of material, their tech pack, their fit. All this is part of a suite of capabilities we try to build with our vendors. So it's not only associated to the production itself, but it's from the product creation to the delivery of the product end to end. And a big part of that, it's also everything relating to data, because I think the future is also how you can bridge very, very fast the demand and the supply. And the only way to look at that is to look at that from a data standpoint, And as data improve, then the relationship, the transparency, and the partnership with the vendors will also improve. But this bridging between data, customer insight, and supply is going to be part of the future as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I suppose a lot of the onus is on the manufacturing side to also get up to speed in terms of what they're doing.
Yes. I think on the manufacturing side, you need to start with priorities first. Before you invest in highly, technological innovation, you need to look at your vendors and say, hey, listen, with what you have today, do you really own your performance? Are you really, fully part of the company? Are you really doing the best in terms of quality? Are you doing the best in terms of doing the right thing in your factories? And then from this, you can identify, the business, the vendors with which you want to partner more deeply, because partnership takes time to build. It takes time to nurture. It takes time to manage. And this is where the sourcing function are going to pivot. Rather than holding hands of the vendor, we're going to spend time looking at building this interdependency deeper and deeper, connecting together at different levels. If you build system to be able to read better your demand and read better the data, it's not something you can unwind very easily, right? So you need to pick the right partners you want to really develop this long-term relationship with, because you can't just decide every season you want to change this partner vendor. You're going to be in it for the long run. And that's super critical to spend the time to analyze the data and look at the performance and look at the capability of these vendors for the future, and also their capability to understand your customers, and their capability to invest as well, because investment is going to be a key part of the future.
So when you're talking about investment, you're talking about CapEx as well as in more sophisticated staff who'll be able to work with data in the way that you discussed, or be able to contribute more in terms of innovation.
Exactly. It's not just investment in machinery, it is investment as well in brand power, being equal partners to us, helping us to understand what the future is going to look like, and also strategically shape the supply chain that we need. So not just only us making requests, but I say, if you have a seat at the table, then you listen to each other and you have more brain around this table. And this is how you can shape better strategies for the future. So you're totally right. It's not only the investment in capital and in investment and in cash to buy machine and technology. It's also stepping up the quality of the team working in these companies and being able to intersect and interact, with our teams as well at a different level.
Yeah, I think that's something that's a lot of vendors would like to have. But as you're saying, they have to not just want it, they also have to be willing to invest in that level of probably middle to upper middle level staff that can actually carry that out.
Yeah, that's going to make a big difference, because, you're right. Many vendors would like to get to this level, but unfortunately, not all of them are going to be able to reach this level. There's going to be a big difference between the one that want to do it and the one that can do it. And unfortunately, for many, many vendors, if you have been order takers all your life, you've developed a mindset of just taking orders and being able to play the game at the right level and at the level which is going to be expected from you, from companies like us. It's going to be only for a few selected vendors which have already developed these capabilities in the last few years. It's like digital tools. If you've not been using digital product creation tools in the last 2 years, you won't not able to develop them and use them at the full capability during COVID. So the same with vendors. I think as things are accelerated, unfortunately, vendors which have the capability today and will be able to accelerate, they're already there. They already exist. So this is within this pool of vendors that we have to select and build this interdependency and these strategic partnerships. I don't believe somebody who's never done it before is going to be suddenly be able to operate at the highest level.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, it takes time to be able to build that capability and to really develop it. So taking this a little bit further, most suppliers, when I'm speaking to them, tell us that they're trying to add new services, trying to add value through more services for their clients. What services would you find most valuable? I mean, ideally, how would you like your best suppliers to become even better? What could they do to better support you?
Well, I would say first, own your performance. Each vendor needs to start by owning what they are committed to do. So we're talking about your quality, your on-time shipments, being committed to do the right thing in factories in terms of taking care of the workforce, of the workers you have, training them, protecting them. There's still a lot to be done in these very simple areas before we start thinking about more elaborated, capabilities. But for some of them, which are already ticking the box and operating at a very high level, then it's about, this co-creation, this design capability. That's very, very important. And for me, the most important is how do you bridge, and I was saying that before, how do you bridge the demand and the supply? And this is where a lot of improvement has to be made. And it will be made through analyzing, being able to work with data, work with insight, which is not what we've asked vendors to do. We've asked them to, this is an order, just produce the order. Now we're going to say, hey, help us to understand better customers. This is the data we have in our business. You have data on supply. Let's try to match this data so that we are able to, replenish faster in season. Help us design for manufacturing. So our designers need to also understand the production capabilities, the machine, what enable us, to be able to react within the season, not for the next season, not for the season after, not for next year. But when we identify a trend with customers, how can we immediately, play with this trend and maximize the fulfillment that we have in place? And all this is going to, as I say, all this is going to necessitate new capability and new technology. And this is where I think the future is in terms of investment and in terms of creating this interdependency.
I think that's really interesting. It's quite visionary because I think that for most vendors in the past couple of years, most of their attention has been really on ramping up sustainability. So in terms of capital investment and in other areas, I think from what most of them have been saying, they've been focusing more on that. So I think it's interesting that really, from your point of view, the big picture is being able to do more on data, more on analytics, and that kind of thing.
I mean, it's great that they've invested in sustainability and they still, have to do it. But, the biggest issue in sustainability, in a way, is ordering too much of what your customers do not want. And what do you do with that?
Right.
Because this is how you deplete, the natural resources. If I produce too much of something nobody wants, so what do I do with that? I discount them, I sell them for nothing. This is not the right thing to do, right? If you can match and say, hey, I don't need to produce, that many, but I need to produce less. But what I produce, I'll be able to sell it at a higher margin. I'll be able to sell it through and be able to respond faster to what my customer want to pay, with a higher margin, with less markdown. This is also contributing to sustainability. And not everybody understand that. But, data enable you as a company to be also more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good point about being able to make what people want when they want it and the exact amount they want, because it contributes to, of course, sustainability problems of having excess inventory. But it's also, in a sense, you could say maybe the sustainability of the company as a whole by being able to have better margins, which supports everything upwards in terms of the entire organization. So I think that's certainly, it's a very interesting and very visionary way of looking at the supply chain. I'm glad that you've brought that up.
Yeah. So, and for us, this is how we see the future. So, easy to say, it's going to take a lot of efforts and a lot of time to build it. And that's why I always, take the opportunity to talk to my colleagues working in the sourcing industry that this whole model of sourcing being between a brand and a vendor needs to move on. We need to reinvent sourcing because our job is to build this relationship, is to build these strategic, interdependencies. And this is where it takes time because you need to create a new operating model. You need to work with your brands. You need to decide what you're going to stop doing, where we're going to invest, how we're going to connect all these dots. And that's super exciting. But and for me, this is where the sourcing of the future is going to be. That's what sourcing people in the future are going to be doing, and not the traditional work, the tactical work we're currently doing with our brands and with our vendors.
It's very exciting. You're right. And I think that it reframes sourcing from what it used to be to an entirely sort of a new age look at it, which is really, I think it's going to be very attractive for a lot more people to come into that, people with new skill sets. Very interesting.
Yeah, it will be more strategic. It will contribute to the strategic vision and the strategic reason to be for an enterprise. So it's going to also to need different type of talents. We're talking about talents in the vendor base, but talent in sourcing are going to be very, very different from what they've been, since the creation of sourcing. So yeah, super exciting.
So when you're looking at all the challenges that you face, of which there are many, running a massive global supply chain like you do, right now, what's the thing or couple of things that are keeping you awake at night? In other words, right now, what's most problematic?
Well, I think there's nothing. I think the worst thing that could happen, and what always worried me, is about something going wrong in a factory. Okay, like a fire, for example. It's always related to worker safety. I think we've done a lot, and the industry as a whole has done a lot for worker safety in the last years. But this is an area where you never cross the finishing line. And in this domain, you always need to remain vigilant. All the rest, I think we can cope with. The industry is super reactive. What's most important for me is to make sure that, people making our products for customers are treated decently, are treated safely and with dignity. And it's always what always worries me and keep me awake all the time or vigilant. And I say not because we don't do anything for that. We've done a lot and we're still doing a lot. But this is where you can have issues. I think, as I say, the industry has done a fantastic job. We've done a great job, but this is where you can never say, "Oh, it's done and we're safe. Let's move on." We always need to work with our vendors, work with the NGOs to make it the best it can be all the time. All the rest we can deal with. All the rest there are challenges thrown out at us, and most of the fashion retailers and the fashion vendors are being used to deal with this kind of headwinds all the time. So nothing else bothers me more than making sure that people making our products are safe and treated with dignity and with respect.
Well, that's very good to hear, and I think that it's an important message for the entire industry. It's certainly been a big issue, and I think that looking forward towards human rights is a very critical part of who we are as companies, but also as people, as individuals.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I say, all the rest we can deal with, whatever it is, so that's the only area where I'm always worried all the time.
Running a supply chain as vast as what you have, it's not easy. Too many moving parts.
Yeah, and there are a lot of moving parts, and most of the challenge we are facing into are not intentional challenges. Things happen, and we need to make sure then when this challenge happen, then the human being are being protected because we have all the safety nets in place. So that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Christophe, thank you so much for taking the time to share your views. I've learned a tremendous amount. I think that it's really such an exciting vision for our industry as, in a sense, a roadmap for how we can progress. It's nice to see that you and Gap are taking such an important leadership role here.
Yeah, well, listen, Jen, a pleasure to be on your podcast. Having a seat at your table is always great. So again, thank you for the invite, and I hope my colleagues in the industry will get something out of this conversation. But it was a great moment with you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. And the podcast is actually being downloaded now in over 63 countries around the world. So yes, your colleagues around the world will certainly be able to benefit from this. So again, thank you. I certainly wish you and everyone at Gap continued success. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join us again next week when I'll be sitting down with Eric Williams, Senior Vice President, Global Head of International Supply Chain at Kuhn & Nagel, to talk about the current situation and future outlook for logistics. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next episode.